like when a horror movie, everything seems resolved, but then suddenly the scary monster comes back
Yeah,
up.
be the scary monster that pops back up and metamodern us out of this thing. Hi, my name's Laura. I'm here with PJ and our wonderful guest, who PJ is going to introduce shortly, but you are listening to Love Letters to the Future, a show where we talk about old stories that we want to trash and new ways of seeing the world that we like to bring forward. So, PJ, tell everybody about our guest that we're having today.
Hey everybody, I'm PJ Manney, and I'm thrilled to introduce you to Greg Dember. Greg's a Seattle-based musician, songwriter, and independent researcher in our topic today, metamodernism. I want really to explain what's so cool about Greg. Greg saw something that is now crucial to how we see communication, the heart of art and culture right now. This big word, metamodernism. And we're here today to talk with Greg, who runs a wonderful website called What is Metamodern? Along with his partner. Can you pronounce Linda's last name for me?
Linda Ceriello. And people often have trouble getting it.
Greg has written an incredible book, which I'm going to tell him to pick up right now and share everyone. Say Hello to Metamodernism, Understanding Today's Culture of Ironicity, Felt Experience, and Empathetic Reflexivity.
I love the word ironicity.
Isn't that fabulous?
Ironicity. It is a great word. I like making up words. What is it called when you mush two words together? There's a word for that.
Portmanteau.
A portmanteau. So ironicity. All right. I love it.
He also has an upcoming book on the metamodern music of Sufjan Stevens, and I'm a massive fan of his. So I'm really looking forward to that. So hello, Greg. Welcome.
Hi.
So the big question on everyone's lips is, what is metamodernism?
Okay.
Here we go.
Yeah. Every time I have to answer that question, I seem to do it in a different way.
Good.
So I guess what I'll start off saying this time is the premise behind the idea of metamodernism is that culture often can be found to fit into periods or phases historically. So metamodernism is a lot of scholars in the humanities and in the arts and people who study popular culture feel that the period that we're in now is something that should be called metamodernism. And in the last about 150 years or so, we've been kind of in this cycle that starts with a period called modernism. And then modernism was followed by postmodernism, and then, which makes sense, and then metamodernism, we're claiming, is what's emerging out of postmodernism now.
I hope you're going to define what modernism and then postmodernism is just really, really quickly for those of us who aren't like art, history, culture scholars.
Yeah. So modernism starts roughly at the turn of the 19th to 20th century, maybe a couple decades before 1880, something like that. It was basically a preoccupation with things that were new and invented by humans, getting past the surface appearances of things and getting past habits and traditions and ways of thinking that over the centuries before had just kind of piled up on top of stuff. And the modernists were about clearing that stuff away and finding the what they considered to be the true objective structures that you would find when you scraped away the detritus of tradition.
It sounds like it correlates with the Industrial Revolution.
There was an acceleration of all of that around the turn of the century with electricity and telephone making communications instantaneous and radio, and these ideologies like Marxism and capitalism that people thought like this is the way that we're going to solve all problems for all time. for everybody. So these kind of universalist ideologies. And then this was all kind of embodied in the arts, with artists who were trying to use new inventive ways of approaching their form and going past simply representation.
Sure. Can you give some examples, like that the average person like me who isn't an art historian would know? Like, who were the groundbreaking modernist artists?
Well, in literature, Virginia Woolf and James Joyce, and what they were doing was they weren't just telling the story that you could see from the outside. They were getting into the consciousness of what they imagined the consciousness of the characters were underneath the surface. Music is like Schoenberg's 12-tone, where he escaped kind of the constraints of conventional melody and like kind of came up with systems to force composers, or himself as a composer, to like land in new sonic territory.
So interesting.
Yeah.
And then with painters, who?
I'm hesitating on painters because all of a sudden I'm afraid I'm gonna, but I'm honestly.
No, I'll jump in. I'll jump in.
Please.
So you have the Cubists like Picasso and Braque, and you have then the Surrealists who were looking for the emotional underneath of what reality was. So they were creating these surreal landscapes so that people could feel. You could have a real sense of an interior psychological experience that was reflected in an image that you could see. The modernists are fascinating. Also in architecture, we get the whole idea of form follows function from the Bauhaus and Le Corbusier and these, those machines for living.
And again, they're taking away the surface ornamentation and kind of like stylistic things that had just kind of accumulated in the traditions of architecture over the centuries or over the years, to strip all of that away so you could see the function and see the structure that the building was made of.
Modernism, a lot of it happened because of two giant figures, Albert Einstein and Sigmund Freud. And they both, in a sense, exposed the underbelly, even though we realize Freudian theory is pretty much bunk. At least he started that sense of, well, why do people act this way? Where does this come from? What are the roots to this behavior and these thought processes? And of course, Einstein ripped the fabric of reality by saying, hey, there are actually formulas for how time and space and matter work. So let's uncover these secrets of the universe. And then you start to see their work influencing all these other areas of artistic endeavor. So that's where modernism sort of comes as a chunk and moves through time with that. Yeah.
So then we get to postmodernism.
Right.
Which is?
So postmodernism emerged sometime after World War II, anywhere, depending on who you're talking to and what the specific area is, anywhere from immediately after World War II. And sometimes people feel that the dropping of the atomic bomb was kind of the signpost of the shift from modernism to postmodernism, because in a sense, the atomic bomb was kind of the culmination of technological innovation. And then we immediately saw the tragedy of it. And so the postmodernists were critical of the premises of modernism. So anywhere from like immediately after the dropping of the atomic bomb to even the 80s, but somewhere in there. Second
This is
half
so
of the
interesting.
20th century.
I just have to jump in and say I wasn't expecting this to be this interesting, and I'm like wrapped. So yay. Okay, so now we're into postmodernism, and we get the example.
So postmodernism, if you compare it to modernism was like, hey, you guys, all the stuff you were doing before was wrong, it was misguided, you were just kind of doing what people before you told you to do, but we have found the answer. And postmodernism took it a step further and said, I don't even trust your one true answer, modernism. You're not taking into account context, you're not taking into account what the perspective is of the person who created the theory. Is all of this just kind of based on Western assumptions, and does it apply around the globe? Does it apply within different socioeconomic brackets? Do things that were largely driven by men make any sense for women, much of the time, et cetera, et cetera? But postmodernism is not just this sort of political, part of it is a political kind of like looking out for the interests of the marginalized, but it's also, in a more general way, it's about paying attention to context and the way parts come together as a whole. So where modernism said we can actually find the truth and find clarity by looking at individual parts and kind of pushing away all the irrelevant things, postmodernism said you can't really get away with just looking at an individual part. You have to understand things in their context and as part of a system. Postmodern culture often relied on irony as a kind of fallback. If you always kind of have an ironic stance going, it will prevent you from naively settling into like the one true answer, because irony is always looking at the opposite of whatever the main thing you're saying is. So postmodern art forms are, rife with irony, and in order to kind of establish connection and relationship and part of a system, a postmodern art form will often utilize intertextuality, meaning, for example, like a character in a novel is reading some other famous novel, or film. Postmodern film is notorious for having call-outs and allusions to other films.
Give an example or some examples.
The Scream franchise in horror film.
Okay.
It's just all it is jokes, inside jokes about other horror films. Are the scary scenes really that scary? No, because you're laughing.
A lot of comedy is postmodern. A lot of you think of like Monty Python and how they're actually, their comedy isn't just about the thing they're claiming to tell a story about. It's about the act of telling that story. And when you look at something like Monty Python and the Holy Grail, how they're constantly breaking that fourth wall, or they're pulling the camera back and they're getting picked up by the cab, or whatever it is, you're seeing how the thing is made as a joke of like, okay, you thought you were seeing a story about King Arthur and his knights, but really we're just taking the piss out of storytelling. And
that's interesting. I thought you were going to say like Apocalypse Now or something.
I would say Apocalypse Now was, even though it came out like right in the middle of the period I'm calling postmodern, I would say it was largely just a sort of straightforward modernist story. And that's the thing, is it's not like everything modernist just stopped at a particular year and then everything became postmodern.
Of course. What about like Rushdie's Satanic Verses?
Well, a lot of Rushdie's work refers back to the fact that he's making culture. Like you never separate out Rushdie the author from what Rushdie is writing.
Which is kind of what you're saying, postmodernism.
Yes, absolutely.
What about art and music? Like other music? Yeah, we need some examples so that people...
Well, in art, Andy Warhol is kind of the classic example.
That makes sense, yeah.
And then in music, like punk rock in general, new wave music in general. So like a lot of new wave music isn't really about... Like, there are lyrics and there are stories, but it's more about references to styles that you're familiar with as a listener. And in general, postmodernism, I mentioned irony, I mentioned intertextuality. Postmodernism often rejects modernism's claim to be able to go deep and find something important underneath, and postmodernism finds that you go down one level, but then you can start digging into that level, and then there's another level, and it just goes on forever. So why bother searching for the foundational meaning. Let's just stay on the surface. Let's just stay on the surface, skate around, have fun, become aware of our context and our interconnections with things. So a lot of the music of the 80s and 90s is that way.
I think of REM as one of the perfect examples for people in terms of of pop music. They were so good at referencing the culture.
Yep.
And especially in songs like, It's the End of the World as We Know It and things like that, which may be the most postmodern song of all.
Okay. So there's all the irony. I can see that.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, of course.
Exactly.
Michael Stipe was famous for not even really trying to make his vocals legible.
Yeah.
Like he just mumbled because it didn't matter. Or Talking Heads. Now, Talking Heads is weird because in a few cases, some of their songs I think were early metamodern.
I agree with that.
But if you put that aside, Talking Heads is like Stop Making Sense, Burning Down the House. It's just they
Life During Wartime.
Yeah, they were arty. They weren't like lowest common denominator music, but they brought the artsy people who were their fans down a few notches intellectually while still being clever, and kind of satisfying that kind of smart person itch.
So this is actually a great point to ask you, what is metamodernism now that we have a foundation laid?
Of course, there's so much more we could say about postmodernism, but we'd never stop. So
Of course. Yeah. People probably get a PhD in it.
Okay, so metamodernism then emerges around 2000, maybe a few years before. And the way I understand it is that it emerged because of an exhaustion with the postmodern tendencies to take the piss out of things, to make it embarrassing. I mean, postmodernism is fun, but then when you take it too far, it gets old because everybody's embarrassed to actually say how they actually feel and to appear naive in thinking that, something actually matters.
In a way that, like, we're never going to be as cool as a punk rocker, so why bother? And it feels like it's almost trying too hard.
Yeah.
Remember everybody wore black eyeliner, and now it's just like, oh, really? I'm going to fucking put on black eyeliner? I'm tired.
So a TV show that I kind of think is like the culmination of postmodernism, and then we moved on, and it's a great TV show, I love it, is Seinfeld, which famously describes itself as being a show about nothing. And I'm not saying it's a bad show. It's really fun, and, kind of the joke I'm sorry, we're still talking about postmodernism, but the kind of ongoing joke in Seinfeld is that, like, all the characters are ridiculous. Everything that they care about or aim to do is actually selfish or, based on human frailty. And it's rife with references. And I even read somewhere that Jerry Seinfeld, it was either Larry David, who was the background producer of it, or Jerry Seinfeld himself, who said no hugs allowed, no lessons learned allowed. They didn't want to have any of that. And that's kind of the ultimate in postmodernism. So eventually, after the 9 seasons or whatever of postmodernism, it's done, and you want things that actually do embrace meaning and beauty and significance and aspiration.
And we get Fleabag.
Mm-hmm. With the metamodern, you still have to satisfy that wryness of the postmodern sensibility, because we all went through that and still feel that. So metamodern things we use the word oscillate in our metamodern scholarship theory. Oscillate meaning going back and forth between earnestness and irony, universalism and fragmentation, hope and skepticism. So the metamodern cultural product, as a viewer, as an audience member, you can't decide whether it's really earnest or truly ironic. And the more you start believing it's one of those things, the more sort of evidence pops up to convince you that you had it totally wrong and it's the opposite one.
That's so interesting. So now we need so many examples.
Okay.
And we can discuss them, right? Each
Yeah.
example? Okay, good.
Starting in the 2000s, there were bands like Death Cab for Cutie and Sufjan Stevens. I'm not seeing any nods from Laura.
Yeah, I'm more of a pop person. Anybody who's like severely pop.
One of my favorite examples is Billie Eilish.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
So, like, you watch a Billie Eilish song, and through the song, it moves from, like, extremely transgressive, brazenly sexual lyrics and expression to very childlike, innocent details. And then, like, she's famous as a performer, she's famous for stopping in the middle of a song to make sure a particular person in the audience has enough water, because she actually cares in that way for her audience. So there's this like flip-flopping or oscillation between kind of a punk rock sensibility and then kind of a sort of just a very open, vulnerable, authentic expression of feeling.
I guess the relationship she has with her brother also on stage
Yes.
seems vulnerable and authentic.
It's interesting. If I can just bring up something that I saw today. So the poet, who's also happens to be Professor Ocean Vuong, just did a video where he basically begs his college students' generation to stop with cringe, to not worry about cringe. That cringe is actually destroying their capacity to feel, to relate, to connect, to be honest. And it was so moving. I mean, he's one of my favorite poets, but to hear him talk about it, it's like, in my head, knowing we were talking today, I was like, these are kids who are still hanging on to that old concept of what cool is. They think cool is cringing from emotional connection.
Right, or being aloof so you're like over there.
Exactly. And what's interesting to me is that cool evolves with culture.
Even the word cool, like nobody uses that except us people, the olds.
The idea of what is acceptable, relevant, desirable, attractive, I mean, those are all aspects of cool, evolves along with culture. And what he's actually saying is you have this old idea of what should be cool and what isn't cool. And I'm telling you, you're not only wrong, you're neutering yourself emotionally. And I just thought that was so brilliant, because one of the things that I love about metamodernism is this rejection of what the old perceptions of cool are. Like, what's cool? What is a cool way of being in the world? It's just being in the world is what's cool. Engaging with the world, connecting with the world. You can comment on the world, so that you've got the postmodern commentary, but you never stop the connection to the world, which is that the honesty and the ironicity.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm thinking, when you talked about modernism and postmodernism, we talked the examples was like books and some films and painters. But books and films and painting aren't really as popular now as like YouTube, which they didn't even have back then, right? And also now streaming series are more popular than movies. So now that we're talking about metamodernism, let's talk about some of those examples and then go deeper into them, and like, why should people care and why is it relevant and what does it mean for our culture right now?
I think everybody who's ever heard me say the word metamodern has also heard me use the example of everything everywhere all at once,
Yes.
which I think is a perfect example of how the internet and connected culture affects storytelling in a purely metamodern way.
So that film won the Academy Award 2-3 years ago.
You're making me feel old. That
I'm not making you feel old. If you feel old, that's on you.
Should we talk a little bit about Everything Everywhere?
Yeah.
All at Once?
Sure.
Daniel Kwan, one of the two Daniels who are the directors, actually said in an interview that it's metamodern. And then to explain what he meant by metamodern, he said, when we were making the film, we were aware that, we as the filmmakers and our audience are immersed in references, we're immersed in cultural examples, and so we can't escape that. So our film is going to have that, what I called before, intertextuality, references to other films in it, but we don't want to stop at the intertextuality. We're using the intertextuality not just to wink and nod, but to actually bring feeling in to the movie and bring feeling into the viewer. So, Everything Everywhere All at Once, on the one hand, it's this incredibly wacky film, and it's about a multiverse, which is kind of a postmodern thing because the multiverse is kind of a model for all the possibilities, and your reality isn't even the one sole reality, and you have to be aware of all the other ones. So that's kind of a postmodern thing, but the movie just comes back again and again to the family relationships, and then the father, whose name I'm suddenly forgetting. Waymond, yes. So Waymond, though, in the end, is kind of the hero and final arbiter of the film's ethic because he says, just be kind. And that's the solution to all of these overwhelming problems, which range from how are we going to get our taxes paid to how are we going to save our universe from the ravages of the multi-universe. And in the end, it's just be kind. And in the end, the mother and the daughter reconcile, and all of this sweetness.
I had so many friends who were children of immigrants, especially the Asian children of Asian immigrants, who watched that film and said they just wept. There's so many touchstones within that movie where people have a hook for their personal experience. One of my hooks is it's so clear that Michelle Yeoh's character has ADHD. And I watch her character and my heart breaks because I understand her struggle and I understand her frustration with starting things. And yet it's that being that generalist, obviously, that saves the universe, which I think is hysterical. Our culture tells you have to be an expert at something. And this is a story where being a generalist saves the day.
And her ADHD is literally manifest as these multiple universes, and in each universe she has a different project.
Exactly, and can manage in all of those universes. I mean, that's what I think is so fascinating. So there are so many different aspects of characters and these very deep meanings where you really could drill down, and yet it really provides hooks for the audience, many hooks for the audience, where I think in modernist classical filmmaking, that wasn't ever a consideration. Casablanca isn't great because there are all these hooks that people can relate to. It's great classical, straight storytelling done in a really immaculate way with a perfect formula. Whereas Everything Everywhere All at Once is literally... there are so many hooks. I mean, it's almost countless how many things you can attach yourself to, whether you're attaching yourself to the daughter or the father or the mother or the grandfather or, all the different manifestations. It's really interesting.
They never say, this is a story about an Asian immigrant family and why you see, here's some aspects of it. You just start in the middle of their day, and if you're not from that community, you have to catch up. And if you are from the community, you're like, oh yeah, this is just what it's like.
I talk a lot about this in reference to the new mythos, and one of the things that characterizes some stories that are new mythos, and I think most metamodern stories are new mythos. They overlap tremendously. And that is the sense of the fracturing of time and space, which is literal in Everything Everywhere All at Once. I mean, it's quite literally what the story is about. But I also see it in the presentation. And I look back at this not just in, well, you and I are now talking, I'm thousands of miles from you. And so we have fractured space so that I can talk on one side of the Pacific and you can be on the other side of the Pacific. And people will be seeing this in asynchronous time. It's not live, etc. But my kids would listen to Pandora in the old days and Spotify now. And they would be led down rabbit holes of musical styles. So suddenly my 14-year-old was madly in love with AC/DC or Johnny Cash.
I was having this conversation with young people just the other day because they were listening to songs that came out. I was alive when those songs came out, and they're listening to it retrospectively. So I was just wondering, what's it like culturally? Because if I think about songs that came out before I was alive,
we think of it as these songs like Stuck in Time. I mean, the infamous story in our family is my son asked for an allowance advance. I asked what for a CD on a guitarist I apparently had never heard of and I wouldn't be that interested in. And when I asked who, it was Jimi Hendrix.
I was just thinking of Jimi Hendrix.
And so, of course, being pedantic mom, trademark, I had to drag him to a monitor and sit him down in front of the movie Woodstock and then have to teach him about, the context of protest songs. This movie and metamodernism in general is basically saying, look at all the output that the world has made. We have the ability to reference all of it. And this feeds into another thing that I'd love to hear you talk about, and that's crisis culture. Because I think that metamodernism is such a response to existential crises. It's not just a movie like Everything Everywhere, which is like the literal existential crisis, but it's like we need all the tools. No tools are left out. I need to see the wall of every weapon to figure out what the right thing for the crisis is. Like, how do I solve this problem? And in modernist perspective, I always felt that, they always assumed they knew what the right tool was. In postmodernist perspective, they were like, you don't even know what the tools are. And in metamodernist perspective, it's like, hey, I'm on the internet now. I got all the tools. Because I guess what my big question is, why metamodernism? Why now? Why is it here? Why should we care?
Before you kind of jump in there, I think we can't just keep referencing this one movie. So we need to broaden our references, because then it's like, I think we're getting too narrowly focused if we don't bring in other references.
The one that's popping into my head, and we almost always end up talking about it on podcasts, going back to the beginning of the metamodern period, is Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
I didn't watch. I guess it just depends on. I mean, maybe this is a metamodern phenomenon. Is that there's so much content out there now that people. I mean, on your website, you talked about Barbie, the movie.
Yeah.
And I think most people are pretty familiar with Barbie. It was pretty recent compared to when was Buffy the Vampire Slayer out?
The late 90s.
Yeah, I was going to say that was the 90s.
Yeah, Barbie's actually a great example to watch.
Can I just say that coming into this podcast, I wasn't sure 100% what metamodern was. So I think that the audience hopefully is like following along and is there with you. So well done.
So, and both of you feel free if you can think of reasons why Barbie is metamodern that I don't bring forth.
Well, there was definitely a lot of sincerity and a lot of everything was referential, and yet everything was simultaneously sincere and kind of a sweet, almost so sweet it was yucky. But then there was also a lot of like irony and poking fun. I mean, the Kate who played the doll that everybody tore up. I mean, oh my gosh! But we all completely related to her, but it was completely ironic at the same time.
And you
for example,
about
Kate McKinnon who played the doll. Yeah.
And you mentioned the experience of something being so sweet that it's almost yucky. But the difference between a metamodern thing that has that in it versus a modern or traditional thing that has it is if you have more of that jaded, postmodern, been there, done that, sensibility to you, and you're watching an old school thing that's so sweet that it's yucky, you feel alienated and you feel alone because you're like, what's wrong with me that everybody else loves this and thinks it's so sweet, but I think it's yucky. Whereas in something like Barbie, you're not alone, because you know that Greta Gerwig, the director, knows that people are going to be feeling certain moments are so sweet that they're yucky, and she's in on that.
Of course, even Barbie is in on her own joke against herself. That's why it's so... Because like a women our age, when Barbie first came out, you're like, oh my God, Barbie. And then it was like Barbie was on our side. Oh my God, Barbieing herself, which is maybe the most... Also very metamodern.
And then its relationship with the actual Mattel Corporation, like, was that movie, on the one hand, was it just selling Barbies for Mattel? Is that film just one big ad for Mattel, or is it a takedown of Mattel? Because
both.
Exactly.
And is that question a metamodern question, that you can be both?
Yeah, and I think that the Mattel executives who, endorsed it and went, because they had to agree to it.
They probably funded it.
They were in on it, obviously, and they have to, even though they don't know the word metamodern, probably, they have to have some level of kind of understanding of the metamodern sensibility in order to have been able to back the movie.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, then, people who are listening right now, and me a week ago, didn't understand the term metamodern, but we are alive, so we're living within it. Yeah. So everybody who's alive right now, who's paying attention to the culture, probably is aware of the experience of it.
And also there was the question of kind of like, what motivates metamodernism?
Oh, right. Why? So I guess that's also two questions, in the sense of like, is the art of metamodernism a reflection of the culture, or is it directing the culture to think a certain way?
Yeah. I mean, I think all art goes in both directions, so that's not unique to metamodernism.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as kind of like what made artists and audiences want to move from the postmodern to the metamodern, I think that in the early years of metamodernism, my take on that question is that it was exhaustion. It was exhaustion with the postmodern art.
So being tired of always being so negative and downery, and that sucks, and I'm better than this, and I'm too cool for school, and we're tired of grunge. Yeah. Like, where's Lady Gaga in there?
Metamodern.
Even the name Lady Gaga.
So my take is that was kind of what motivated metamodernism at the beginning. But now the world has actually gotten even crazier than it was then. So instead of simply having depressing, meaning drainingness thrust upon us by the arts, it's thrust upon us in our everyday life by the way the world is now. And so with AI, and with the multiplicity of views on the internet, and with politicians who have no allegiance to the truth, while claiming that the other side has no allegiance to the truth. So you can't even say, well, we're the ones that believe in the truth, and they're not, because they tell you that you're fake news,
Yeah, we're in a post-truth society.
Yes, and some people use the term hypermodern to describe the kind of societal conditions that are like that. So it's sort of like what was in postmodern art is now spilled over into how our world, and so now we need the metamodern art just to cope with what everyday life is like.
Because it has the vulnerability in it.
Mm-hmm.
It sounded like they're, bringing beauty back again.
Mm-hmm.
And like quietness.
But not maybe. In a naive way, in a way that is aware of the complexity.
Yeah, self-aware. That's so interesting. Yeah. So your website has a long article about Charlie XCX and the music that came out last summer.
Yeah.
And, of course, Barbie and Barbenheimer was 2 summers ago. So it makes me wonder, it's like, where are we at? Where are we at in 2025? What's the art? What's the cutting edge
That's a really good question.
Maybe metamodern is over and it's all hypermodern. I don't know.
I am not sure what the big metamodern blockbuster of 2025
I
is.
know. Or a song, like literally everybody I talk to. And I know, like, I'm very active on TikTok, so maybe the TikTok is, the new big thing that's going to supplant the other forms of social media.
What are they saying on TikTok?
I don't feel like it's cultural enough because it's only on TikTok.
Okay.
It hasn't broken out into the larger culture where something like Barbie or Brat Summer, everybody knew what Brat Summer was. And even 3 years ago, it was Break My Soul. It was that Beyonce song, and that really hit. And it felt like every single person, it was talking about like sick of being on that grind, and everybody like felt the same feeling that summer. And I'm just like, where is like, I can't tell you how many people I've asked, where is the song of the summer? I was at a restaurant and we asked the waiter, and then he didn't know, and so we asked a gay guy, and he was like, "Oh my God, there's no song of the summer! I can't believe it." And then somebody came back saying that La Boo Boo, and I'm like, no, La Boo Boo. It's like a little toy that people are buying. And
They're little toys that attach to your handbag as a charm, and they're like if Cabbage Patch Kids met Beanie Babies, met those really hideous troll dolls.
It's like a pet rock. It's like a meaningless tchotchke nothing.
It's funny. I had a conversation with my daughter about these yesterday.
About Labubu.
About Labubus. And we both feel like it's much more a reaction to the fact that people are in crisis and there is a need for infantilization. So, you'll have very wealthy women with incredibly expensive handbags, or not. They could just be normal women with handbags, but they have to hook all these little dolls to them. And, it started with charms, and now it's these little horrible little plastic things, which of course, then I go back to it's made of petroleum and is killing the planet.
It's garbage. It's total garbage.
But it's the infantilization that's so fascinating.
But how does that relate to metamodern, though? Or maybe it's not.
No,
it does.
It does.
It does. Okay.
Yeah. In my book, part of my book is I suggest 11 metamodern methods. And they're different artistic or aesthetic strategies that people use in metamodern artworks. And one of them I call metacute. And I define metacute as the using of childlike imagery or symbols to deal with adult concerns. And so I don't know what Labubu is myself.
Full-grown women are clipping ugly toys to their handbags.
That's metacute.
Okay.
And it's self-soothing. I mean, I honestly believe that these are self-soothing things. I mean, that infantilization is, when you go, the old startup cultures where you used to, there'd be ball pits and ping pong tables and all that.
Oh, right. If you worked at one of the startups, you would have a ping pong table.
But it was all these very self-soothing objects that bring you back to a childlike state for a moment.
Yep.
And I think that's where metacute comes in. This is why I keep on going back to this idea that metamodernism is the culture of crisis. Like, I really feel like there's something, the acknowledgement that we are experiencing crises that have deep complexity attached to them. Oh, in fact, you brought it up in your book, one of my favorite philosophical theories of hyperobjects, which the philosopher Timothy Morton, came up with this idea that there exists now in human understanding concepts that are so vast that we can't wrap our heads around them. Climate change is the perfect example of it, but it could be, homelessness or all the styrofoam in the world, or things that we can't actually wrap our heads around. The numbers are too big, the vastness is too big. And then, of course, you also mentioned, and this is something I talk about a lot too, there are movies made about hyperobjects, especially by the director and writer Adam McKay, whose own production company is called Hyperobject Industries, and he makes movies about things like the asteroid coming to Earth, in Don't Look Up, which is really a metaphor for climate change, or all of politics in Vice, or all of finance.
Hang on. You have not yet defined what is hyper object for the people.
Yes, I have. A hyper object.
Okay, sorry. You need to say it again.
Okay, hyper objects are things that are so vast we cannot comprehend them.
And they're not necessarily crisis things.
They're not necessarily crisis things. It could be every bird in North America. Whatever you decide to define it as.
A human being cannot perceive the fullness of it with our five senses.
Sure, but I guess before the internet, we wouldn't even know that there it was a thing, and now there is.
Yeah.
Like, can you tie that in? How is the cute, meta cute, and meta object? Why is that meta modern?
Well, the metacute and the hyperobject are pretty different.
Yeah.
But they're both meta modern.
But they're both metamodern.
So what's the umbrella of meta modern that includes those things?
The way I define the motivation of metamodernism is it's protecting our sense that our interior matters from the potential degradations of postmodernism, postmodern relativism, or modernist reductionism to like simple parts of things.
Yeah, that made no sense.
Oh,
sorry.
Okay. Thank you for that.
It could be me. Maybe I'm tired.
But I think it's accepting, it's recognizing that we need to honor how we feel about things in a world that we suddenly find overwhelmingly complex.
So what you're saying is that what unites those things together is the overwhelm.
Metacute, which is the utilization by adults of childlike things to deal with adult concerns. Metacute is like actually this really brave vulnerability of saying like, I'm really just a child too. Like, I'm not embarrassed to attach Labubu's to my purse. And I actually have to, because without my Labubu, I wouldn't be able to make it through the day. And that's how I feel. And nobody can take that away from me.
Sure. I wish only the Labubu really did make people's day better. And I'm that's my skepticism of thinking, like, look, if I thought a fucking doll would make my day better, I would strap a doll to my ass. But I don't think it's going to work.
But Barbie is like Barbie is the ultimate commentary on metacute. I don't think there's any work of art that better explains it, in that you can both look at them as simply a doll that a child uses, but also as a cultural touchstone that represents how we grapple with our own sense of the feminine.
Of course, but nobody, how many adult women went out and bought a Barbie doll and now are hanging out with it? We watched the movie, we loved the movie, but we didn't need to now own a Barbie doll.
You might not have gone out and bought a Barbie doll, but you might have sort of revived your memories and nostalgia for the Barbie dolls you once had. And I bet some did. I bet.
You think so?
Yeah.
Because of the metacute phenomenon.
Even just the fashion. So like fashion is something I'm really acutely aware of because my mom was a clothing designer. And so the Barbie phenomenon in the entire fashion industry was massive. And I don't just mean the color pink. It was this refeminization on the runways. It was, really embracing cute as a cultural value.
Cute and fun. Let me add, not just cute and also fun.
Okay, and that makes me think of maybe someone who's the Charlie XCX of 2025 is Sabrina Carpenter.
Ooh.
So, and I'm not that connected to pop music. I mostly check it out because of my metamodernism studies, so I can be aware of it. So I might get some of this wrong. But so Sabrina Carpenter, I'm going to make my case. She's notorious for being very sexual, but this is, and I'll get to the metacute later. But first, she's notorious for being like unabashedly sexual, but it's perhaps for the female gaze, not for the male gaze. Like, she's not doing it to arouse men. She's doing it so that non-men. She's doing it so that people who aren't men can relate into and sort of in the same way that Everything Everywhere All at Once did for different cultures. So the sexuality that she performs both in her music but on her stage performances is like it's like, maybe, you know, it's to the women in the audience, maybe this is how you experience.
Sure. I think that is happening with a number of female performers, you could say.
At the same time that all of that is going on, she's cute, she's small, she uses Barbie-like costumery. So she's sort of like a throwback to like a Betty Boop figure from the, whatever that was, the 40s.
Sure.
All rolled up together, and isn't she kind of like, isn't this her summer as opposed to previous summers, or was she already?
As the pop queen, I would say no. But also, as somebody who's a newly, you know, understanding of metamodern, doesn't there also have to be sort of a self-awareness around it too?
I think there is.
Okay.
For her. She's playing a game.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, again, there's quite a few female artists who are also...
I think this has been a fascinating conversation. I think we've really done a number here.
Definitely. The only thing that we still haven't figured out is like where we headed. What's, you know, is there a future for I'm not asking what the next trend is. I'm asking, is there a future for metamodernism, and what can we?
Well, I think metamodernism keeps going, and like it keeps coming up, especially in television.
Yeah.
And you mean like streaming? I wonder if Ted Lasso was a good example. Yeah. Okay, so see, now I'm pulling out the example. Self-aware, both badass, and, you know, world is crumbling, but also very vulnerable and open. And
so I think metamodernism will keep going, but it's possible. Like, okay, so just sort of to end it on a, you know, like when a horror movie, everything seems resolved, but then suddenly the scary monster comes back up.
Be the scary monster that pops back up and metamodern us out of this thing.
So the scary monster to me that pops up is the new Superman movie.
Of course, you can't do a spoiler if it's new.
I'm not going to talk about anything that happens, but I'm going to talk about its vibe. Is that okay?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So there were people who were predicting that it would be like the metamodern film of all metamodern films. You know, it would make, no one would even be talking about Everything Everywhere All at Once or Barbie when the new Superman movie came out. And I went to it, and it's just positive vibes. You know.
But, I mean, doesn't that say more about, like, the boring franchises who have no creativity than it says about, like, Superman as an individual movie?
No, because other superhero movies have been metamodern.
Oh, okay.
Like, Joker was metamodern. And I know we're trying to wrap up, so I'm going to...
That's okay. I mean...
Yeah. But Joker was metamodern, WandaVision's metamodern, Guardians of the Galaxy is metamodern. So, like, you can have the animated Spider-Verse movies metamodern. So it's not that the big franchises can't be metamodern. But this one was just like, it didn't have the oscillation and the complexity and all that. And not only that, but like a lot of people are really excited about it and saying, you know, people are declaring that it's the harbinger of where our culture is going. So,
a super positive, corny movie? Really?
Well, it's interesting because what they're really saying is we're going all the way back around the circle to modernism.
Yeah. And so to me, as a guy who's really into metamodernism, that's the scary monster coming back with a claw.
Oh, we got to go back to like some corny ass bullshit that nobody believes in.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think we're going back. I don't know. Wait a second. I'm not letting this podcast end on that.
Okay.
No, we got to end on a better note than like, oh, we're going back to corny town, bullshit land.
I will agree with Greg in that I'm seeing a reaction against the complexity of the world and a desire by people to retreat into old storytelling because it was simple and gave them simple answers, even though it doesn't reflect reality in any way, shape, or form, but they feel comforted by it. And I can't say to somebody, I'm sorry, you can't have your Labubu.
Of course. So I totally, that makes sense to me. But I think that only there will be some people that soothes for a very short time.
Right,
but I don't
exactly.
think it solves the intellectual needs and the sense of humor. Just because you have metamodern, it seems, doesn't mean that we get rid of all the other art forms before it.
Greg, thank you so much. This has been marvelous.
And thanks, both of you.
We're really thrilled that we get to expose these kinds of ideas to our viewers and listeners. So thank you. Buy the book.
Can we just say the name for the people who aren't watching the video and who are listening?
Say hello to Metamodernism. And then it has a subtitle, but what you need to remember is just say hello to Metamodernism.
It's a really good read. It has tons of examples, and it's very inclusive in so many different kinds of art forms that you will find yourself somewhere within those pages. So don't forget.
Greg Dember, say hello. And do not say goodbye, because we're not over with you yet.
I'm still here.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.